Hey, Teddy. Oh, good.
Oh,
Is say hello to everyone. Oh, there it is. There's Teddy's hello.
hi,
And
Teddy.
hello from Teddy and from me, Anna Isabel, and welcome to Pet Talk with Dr. Holly Tett. Hello. Hi, Holly.
Hi, nice to see you.
And you. Well, after that welcome, I think we'll go straight down to business because there's so much that I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
But the reason that I invited you on is because you, I think, have a beautifully unique take on dogs because you were a psychologist for humans.
Mm-hmm.
And I really get when I'm hearing you talk, the the links that you're making to understanding dogs. And so maybe it might be good for you to explain why that's not anthropomorphizing.
Yes, that's a very good question. And it's a concern I think a lot of people have, isn't it? It's a real concern. Oh gosh, am I putting my own emotional feelings onto my dog? Is that how they're really feeling? And I think ultimately, like, we will never understand the emotional experience of another being, whether that's a dog, a giraffe, a human being. Like, you will never fully be able to know what's going on inside someone's head. But the way that people communicate and the way that animals communicate, even without words, can give us an idea. We can get that kind of sense that, oh, they don't look particularly comfortable in this situation. And that's a blessing to be able to notice that in another being and being able to adapt your own behavior to try and help them to feel more comfortable. Now, with humans, sometimes we can go ahead and say, are you okay? And we might be able to get a response. Not always. Some people will be going, yeah, I'm fine, when actually they're thinking, no, I'm definitely not fine. But with animals, I think sometimes we need to go above and beyond just to make sure that we are supporting them in any way that we possibly can. And the more you know your animal, and especially dogs, the more you see them comfortable and you see them uncomfortable, and then you can adapt yourself when you need to support them when they're not feeling so good. So yeah, I think that's why.
You know, so often, people are apologetic, that they're anthropomorphizing. And I'm saying, no, actually, you're not. You're really not. And I
Yeah.
think some of that comes to being able to trust ourselves, that actually our dogs are a different species, but they're not that different. They are
Yeah.
of this planet. They do have a nervous system. They
Mm-hmm.
have brains that are different to ours, but not so different that it's unrecognizable. There are many similarities.
Absolutely, definitely. And I think something that we are often trained to ignore is our intuition and that kind of gut feeling. And we've all had that. We all know what that feels like when you're in a situation and you just have that feeling. It's not really connected to anything that you know. You might not have any information about a situation that you're in, but you just think this doesn't feel right. And often we're trained to ignore that. And especially when it comes to working with a professional with your dog, they might suggest something and you think, oh, I really don't think he's going to like that. But you feel a pressure to say, oh, okay, because they're the professional, right? Or the professional, I might say. So yeah, I think sometimes we have to really trust that gut feeling that we have about ourselves, but also about the ones that we love and that are close to us, because like I was saying before, we know them the best. So yeah, learning to feel okay with trusting that is important, I think.
Learning to trust that instinct when that goes against what you're being told
Yeah.
is actually really stressful. Because I can remember Teddy is my first doggy companion. He's clearly, wanting to be busy at the minute. Um, he's my first dog companion. He arrived at 8 weeks old, as so many puppies do. And I had done loads of reading to help me prepare. Nothing ever prepares you completely for the reality. And I had a particularly lively cockapoo puppy who was very clever and had his own mind from the word go. And I think where I found it most stressful was things like walking on a loose lead, being told your puppy must, and me knowing my puppy's not ready for that.
Yeah.
My puppy needs to sniff, and he needs to run, and he needs to do everything at 100 miles an hour. And I have to say that I broke all the rules. I ran with him because I didn't want it to turn into a power struggle where I'm saying, you will do this. It felt wrong to me. There were so many little things. And I think the one that really bothered me was the insistence that it must be a collar rather than a harness.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I hated that. And actually it went, the collar went, because my puppy pulled. And it doesn't take, it's not anthropomorphizing to understand that he's gasping because he's pulling. And if we're saying, oh yes, but that's going to teach him not to pull, well, then we're using the collar as really as a choke collar. It's not a choke collar by name, but in effect, it is. And it just felt wrong to me. I couldn't understand that logic. So the collar went, the harness came in. And it's those things, isn't it, that you just have to trust your gut, because your puppy is trying to communicate with you, I think.
Oh, for sure, definitely. And everything's new to them. I always draw this comparison, and lots of people don't like to draw comparisons between dogs and children because of course they are hugely different, but I think it can be helpful sometimes, because if you compare a newborn baby at 8 weeks old and an 8-week-old puppy, newborn baby, most of what they see is the ceiling because they're lying on their back in their bed, or their caregivers' faces, probably 1 or 2 rooms in the house. Like, it's quite a small world. And so they have the space to be able to develop at their own pace, essentially. There's no one pushing them at that age. We don't expect anything of them. Whereas you take an 8-week-old puppy who can move around on their own, get into all kinds of mischief, chewing things, doing things which are potentially damaging. And we start saying, God, I've had him for 4 days and I can't leave the room without him crying. Oh my gosh, has he got separation anxiety? And I'm like, well, no, he's a puppy and he wants to be close to you because he's 8 weeks old and you are all he has. So I think we have to remember that. And even more so when dogs get to about kind of 6 or 7 months old, you look at them and they look like a grown-up adult dog. And so our brain starts to say, you should be walking nicely, you should have a recall, you shouldn't be barking. All of these expectations that we put on them, we would never do that for a 6-month-old child. So I just think it's an interesting comparison sometimes that we get a bit caught up on. It's
a really good comparison, and I'm really not bothered about what people think about comparing dogs to children. The fact is they're nonverbal, and so are toddlers. We know that their ability to understand language it's around at the toddler stage of development. There are many similarities, and I think, not least of which, one thing you said there was about the expectation. So you're looking at a dog that looks like an adult and you expect them to behave like an adult. How many children have that experience because they're taller than average for their age? And people make assumptions about what they should be able to do just because of the way that they look. This happens a lot. And I think, without wishing to be harsh on humanity, it's something that we do naturally, is we make judgments about things. It's not because we're being bad or horrendously judgmental. We're making decisions about what we expect, what we don't expect. And that's where we need to be a little bit more sensitive and cautious and watch.
Yeah, for sure. We do it for ourselves, don't we? Think of the pressure that we put on ourselves. It can come externally, it can come from parents, even as an adult, it can come from peers or colleagues, but a lot of the time it comes from within. We hold ourselves to such high standards, and then when we don't meet them, we beat ourselves up for it. And it's exactly the same for our dogs. Going back to that kind of parent-child comparison. You know, I've got friends that are parents and they say, oh, I went to a baby group and already other parents were saying, my child can do this, can your child do that? And you're thinking, oh my gosh, they're like 6 months old. But it's the same. You go to the dog park with your dog and someone says, how old is he? And you say, oh, he's 2. Oh, he should be off the lead by now. Why is he still on a long line? It's this constant comparison that kind of, I think it makes us feel a bit better about ourselves. That's why we do it. It's not always malicious, but it's heavy going when you feel like you're constantly trying to live up to an ideal, whether that's yourself, your child, or your dog. It's a lot to manage.
18 months is when Teddy's lead was put away permanently. His long lead, his training lead, because that was the age at which I knew I could trust him 90% of the time. And that was it, because I wanted him to have some freedom. And that long line, although it was attached to him, more often than not, it was trailing behind him. It was a means by which I could just grab it if I needed to, or step on it, or do whatever with it. And that was me wanting to give him as much freedom as I could whilst keeping him safe. And it, you know, the day I put it away, the cheer inside me, because I was always filthy because of it. You know, having my hood had actually had mud on it from this thing.
Oh my gosh!
It was everything. It was, and it would get twisted round, you know, in shrubbery and trees. It had knots on it that I couldn't undo. I love that long lead, because despite the fact that it was an outright nuisance and I was absolutely delighted to put it away finally, it allowed Teddy to be free and safe at the same time. In the last 6 months of using it, it was off more than it was on. So it gave me the chance to, what I would do is I'd put it on at the beginning of the walk and see what mood it was in. If he was in what I called a sensible mood, it came off. If he was in a super excitable mood, then it stayed on until the excitement was out of his system, and then I would take it off. And that's how I managed it. So we got on with that long lead, didn't we, Teddy? Didn't we? He says, all in all, I'm glad it's gone.
Yeah, don't get it out again, Mum. It's all good in the cupboard.
Again. So it's really good. I actually wanted to talk to you also about trauma, because it's interesting. In the human context, we think of big trauma, and then we think of those little traumas that come from the tension between child and parent, or the child's needs not being met in the way that the child would like, for any number of reasons. And maybe that's what was guiding me, you know, when I was saying, no, I don't think so. This is creating a power struggle. I'm not going to have that with my dog, thank you. Maybe it was that awareness that was speaking to me. But I can see, when we think of trauma in dogs, we're thinking about rescue dogs, we're thinking about, you know, dogs that have come in off the streets, obviously, dogs that have been abused, obviously. But what's your take on this? Because I think that there's little trauma too.
Absolutely. And what you were saying there about kind of the big T, little t trauma, as we often refer to it, I suppose the way we think about it in humans and in animals is that the big T is that big event. So being, you know, abused, for example, as a dog, obviously that's a massive trauma. Or in humans, maybe a car accident, something like that. It's something that universally we could all agree that's absolutely traumatic. Whereas little t traumas are a bit more individual. So something that might be traumatizing to me would be nothing to you. You wouldn't even register it, and vice versa. And the thing to think about when we think about those little individual traumas, or micro traumas, you might call them, is they're cumulative. So if, for example, Teddy found it really traumatic on every single walk when you got to the park and he immediately was raring to go, but he was on his lead and he was yanking and he was pulling his neck, and he found that really, really distressing. And that happened every day for a year. You can see how that starts to become a much bigger deal for him. And that's something that we then carry on into later life. So it's very easy to just discount it and say, well, my dog's never had any trauma. I've had him since he was 8 weeks old. I've never hit him. I've never done anything awful to him. Fantastic. We don't want to do those things. But often we don't realize that the little things like not meeting their needs, having constant frustration in their lives, maybe having another dog in the home that constantly picks on them, all these kinds of things, that can be traumatizing as well. The other thing that's, I think, really interesting is that we as humans and caregivers for our dogs, we have our own trauma history. And so our own experiences means that we have triggers in the environment. So a classic example, you're talking to a friend or something and they say something, and it's not awful, but it really gets to you. It really pushes your buttons. You're thinking, why am I so wound up by that? Chances are there's something in your history that means that that's a trigger point for you. So often we see this played out with our dogs. So I might go and see a client and they say, oh my gosh, like my dog is driving me mad. No matter what I do, she just won't listen to me. It's not the fact that they've got a teenage dog that's like, la, 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 everything's new and fun. It's nothing to do with the dog. It's actually because maybe that person has their own trauma history. Their parents didn't listen to them. Their partner never listens to them. So when they feel like their dog's ignoring them as well, that creates a huge impact for them, whereas it wouldn't maybe for John 2 doors down, for example. So there's a lot going on when we're thinking about trauma. There's the dog, there's us, and there's that relationship between us as well that's happening too.
Exactly, because this is no different to any other relationship than we would have. We like to think that because it's our dog, we're going to be so much more understanding and tolerant and not let things get to us. Well, how good are we at doing that with children? How good are we at saying, oh, Lily's only 6 and, she doesn't mean it? That turmoil is still there inside, even though you may be struggling to control it. You may be struggling to not allow it to become an issue, but it is an issue inside. And I think what I would say about our dogs is that they are incredibly sensitive and they do pick up on everything, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And if you think about dogs that are used for therapy, for example, so I have a dog, she helps me with human psychology sessions that I do. And I have to make sure I would never see 2 people in a row when I'm working with her, because she is so perceptive that she takes on some of that emotional load. And when she's sat being stroked by someone who's distressed, she needs to go and sleep for 3 hours. She doesn't need to go and do that for another hour. So yes, they are very, very acutely aware of us. And even if you don't have a dog, so lots of people will say, oh, if I got upset and I was crying and my dog came and sat on my lap, lots of dogs do that. Some won't come over to you, but they still sense an atmosphere. Just like if you go into a meeting and you think, this is very tense in here. There's some weird dynamics. No one's saying anything, but there's something weird going on here. There's some tension. Dogs can pick up on that as well. So even if you and your partner aren't rowing and shouting and screaming, if you're ignoring each other, the dog will be like, this is odd. Very, very perceptive in that way for sure.
Yes, there's so many things there that you've just made me think about. And one, I think, is quite a phenomena where, and there's a lovely lady who's an animal communicator, Tammy Billups, in an interview I did with her for another podcast, where she was talking about, and I have seen this, actual physical conditions mirroring between the client and their animal companion. And I've seen this, and it's just quite an extraordinary thing. And even with me and Teddy, thankfully nothing big, but I've noticed that on occasion, if I've had a funny tummy, he has a funny tummy. Now, how is it possible? We haven't eaten the same thing, but both of us are manifesting a funny tummy at the same time. And I know who's likely to be responsible, and it's not, so it's clearly, I know that my digestion's been upset because I'm stressed. And he's not a dog who will come and rush to me and, lick me or try to reassure me or anything like that. But clearly he's picked something up and it's affecting him. And I find that utterly fascinating.
Yeah, isn't it just? I mean, when you really start to think about the power of the brain and the power of influences that we have over each other, it can be a bit scary sometimes, because you think, oh gosh, that's almost a bit much to take in. But absolutely, even you mentioned manifestation there, and many moons ago, I honestly, hand on heart, thought it was a load of rubbish. I was like, oh come on, there's no way that I can manifest something into being. That's not how the world works. I got really interested in it a few years ago, and now I am totally on board, and I've seen evidence of it. So yeah, it's amazing what the power of our minds can do, and for sure influencing physical conditions 100%. But yeah, the mirroring is fascinating, isn't it? Seeing that sort of play out between you and another species, even not even the same species. Really interesting.
And I guess I was bringing that up because I was wanting to demonstrate the level of sensitivity that exists within this relationship. And it's such a beautiful thing, and it's so delicate as well. So it's all the more important that we understand as much as we can, and we give ourselves a good deal of compassion too, because I can remember when Teddy first came. He's being very vocal at the moment. I won't apologize for that.
No, don't.
But when he first came, and we were thinking we wanted to train him to sleep in another room, and we did it very delicately, very gently. I slept in a spare room with him for about 3 months, just to make sure. But I gradually started going to bed. First, we were going to bed together. Then he was going to bed, 10 minutes before me. Then I'd be in the next room and let him go to sleep, and then I'd go in, and that's how we worked it until finally there was no need for us to be there. But I can remember my partner being extremely sensitive to this. And why? Because of his own stuff. He did not want his puppy to be traumatized by us just leaving him and not caring about what was happening to him. So we were both on the same page in this, but I could see where it was coming from him, from something deeper inside that had to do with his own childhood. So that worked for Teddy, absolutely. But that's, again, an example of how sometimes going through the puppyhood stage can really reconnect you to things. I mean, for me, there was also a lot of happy things that came back, like, when he's having a lovely time and doesn't want to come in. That's just like a child having a lovely time, not wanting to come in. And I love that. I love seeing that. So there's all these different things that I think what I'm saying is your puppy, like your child, will reconnect you with your own childhood. And that's going to have some pleasant bits and some not so pleasant bits. And the more aware we are of that, the better.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose the important part when we're thinking about the positive bits, it's great, you can enjoy it. It's just wonderful. But when we're thinking about the more negative things, we have to remember that if you want the pattern to stop with you, so if you had negative experiences in childhood and that's coming up for you again as you're parenting your dog, and you think, no, the pattern stops with me, I'm not going to continue to behave in the way that people behave towards me, you have to cut yourself a little bit of slack and give yourself some grace, because it is not possible to just put a full stop on the end of that sentence and say, right, everything's wonderful, because we can't make triggers go away. We can't erase the past, much as we might like to sometimes. And so it will come up and you will have strong reactions. But the best thing that you can do, well, 3 things that I like to do. The first thing is enlist some support. So if you have a partner, someone else in the house, older children, fantastic. You can say, oh, I need to hand this over to you right now because this is a bit much for me. Not everyone has that available to them. The second option is basically a pattern that you follow when you feel yourself getting stressed. So let's say barking is your trigger. So barking used to be a real trigger for me, really just a hair trigger that would make me immediately frustrated. Not other people's dogs, just my own. And that was because my first dog, when I first got him, he had awful separation anxiety, and we were advised to let him bark it out, which was terrible advice. And so I listened to him howl and bark on the camera for hours at a time, and it was so distressing that from then on, whenever one of my dogs would bark, I would get this immediate anxiety rush. So a different trauma reaction there. So when you feel yourself get that trigger, you have something in place to calm yourself back down. So that could be as simple as like I like to play the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 game. If you're familiar with that one, that can be a nice one. Or it could just be something like getting a hold of something, so touching something cold, like this wall I'm next to is freezing, touching that, playing with your hair, whatever it might be. So something to bring yourself out of that state. And then the third thing is just to make a little note when it happens. So this wound me up today. What do I need to change in the environment so that I can manage this better? Because it's not about changing your dog. It's not about saying to your 12-week-old puppy, you can never bark. That's not reasonable. That's not fair. But it's about how you can change things up a little bit. So when it does happen, you're better equipped, or it's happening less. So I think the real message is to be kind to yourself and not to beat yourself up when it does go a little bit wrong. So long as you're taking steps to be mindful not to cause harm to that dog, that's the most important thing that we're thinking about, and yourself. Yeah.
You were talking there about the effect that having a dog with separation and anxiety had on you, hearing the barking. I can't imagine how distressing that would have been. I think it must have taken some willpower on your part to carry on and persevere. That must have been so hard. And that made me think about other things, like being out on a walk with an anxious dog and how traumatic that actually can become for us. And at what point do we start anticipating and creating the tension? Because that's a big one. And that is one that I'm aware of myself, because Teddy is not a fan of large bouncy dogs coming at him. And his reaction is very aggressive. He thinks that if he looks as mean and dangerous as possible, the other dog will go away. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, on occasion, that provokes the other dog, and that's terrifying. And so I'm aware that I have become too reactive myself, because I'm always looking, and I think, and if I see a larger dog, immediately I'm tense, and I usually move, get him out of the way. We walk in places that are wide, etc. Yeah. But I am very aware of this, and it's a very tricky one to get out of, because you have to lead in confidence, and you haven't got the confidence anymore, because you know that the dog that's standing next to you or walking next to you has a bit of a short fuse. You know? Yeah.
Definitely. And if we think about it in terms of kind of nervous system response, you're going into your own fight or flight response in that moment with that anxiety. We often think about the dog, and we should think about the dog, but it's happening to us in the exact same way. We are mammals as well. And we know that when we are in that fight, flight, flirt or freeze response, the 4 Fs, we're not using our prefrontal cortex. We're not thinking, we're not remembering that training technique. We're not thinking what's the best thing to do. How do we solve a situation? We're right down here in our back brain, in our fear response. And so it's really hard in that moment. I often say to my clients, who's more triggered, you or the dog? And sometimes we're at the point where it is the person that's having more of that kind of response. Really hard. One way that I like to work with that is to go out with your dog's lead in your hand without your dog. Because actually the muscle memory of, or the essentially muscle memory of holding the lead, you feel like you've got them with you. You're still going to have a reaction. It's not going to be as strong, but you're still going to have that reaction when you see that big dog, for example, coming towards you. But it takes away the risk towards your dog. So you're much more able to think in that situation. So that can be the stepping stone towards helping that, I find. Yeah.
That idea. I haven't got a problem at all. In fact, I quite enjoy the odd occasion when I'm out without Teddy and there's lovely big dogs that I can go and say hello to, because I've always been a fan of big dogs.
Yeah.
So if I see a Great Dane, all the better, you know, Irish Wolfhound, hooray. But it's him, and it's being with him. I'm not afraid of the other dog. I'm afraid of his reaction. And I think that's the case for most of us who are in this situation. And I have been aware that there have been occasions where I've completely messed up because I see the other dog coming towards us. He hasn't seen the other dog yet. He might or he might not be okay with it. I don't know. But I'm too scared to take the risk. Mm-hmm. And I'm now rushing him to get him away, thereby making him think, well, what's your problem? And hence, I know that I've messed that up. And I'm really working at the moment to just not do that. Just say, okay, if there's an encounter, let's hope for the best. And what I've done quite a lot recently is when I think he might have a problem, is I take the lead. I mean, not literally his lead, but I in leadership, I say, I leave him where he is and I go and greet the other dog, you know, and I'm friendly towards it. And because I can see it's a friendly dog. It's so I greet it, I say hello, because I want to signal to him, hey, look, you know, I'm okay. Maybe you can be okay too. And I find on the whole, that's been quite successful.
Yeah.
And that's an example of how our feelings can.
Totally. And whenever we're thinking, whether we're thinking about trauma or whether we're thinking about anxiety or just life in general, all any of us want is to feel safe. That's all we need. If we feel safe emotionally and physically in a situation, everything's okay. Everything else can be investigated, explored. We can look at different options. But the moment that we start to feel unsafe, that's when it all goes out of the window. And that's the key for anything, I think, when you're working with dogs. Right, you know, you could do a whole list of 100 training techniques. They could know millions of tricks, but if they don't feel safe, it's out the window. And I think what you said there is really important, because it's individual to the dog what will make them feel safe, just like it's individual to us. So the reason why so many people get so stuck is they spend weeks, months reading online, all these fantastic trainers, behaviorists, they've all got amazing things to say. But if you just apply a random technique to your dog, it might not be what they need to feel safe, so it's not going to work. So you really have to be prepared to experiment and say, I'm going to try this. No, maybe not that. This, does that fit better? And your dog will guide you and you'll be able to say, okay, that's what we need. That's what makes you feel safe. So, yeah.
There's just a world to explore and discuss, because ultimately what we're saying here is that this is about our relationship with our dogs. And it's wonderful to have people who can support us. In fact, in my first year, I don't think I'd have survived without the wonderful behaviorists who guided me and helped me when I felt the pressure of the world telling me that my dog should behave in a particular way, and he wasn't. A lovely puppy school teacher who said to me, you know, I would have your dog over all the others who are so well behaved here. And I thought, oh, really? And then she gave me that wonderful book, Culture Clash.
Yeah.
And suddenly I thought, oh, my puppy's normal.
Yeah.
He's a normal puppy. And that's just the best thing in the world. And we had, despite that, what I've just said, I adored every moment of Teddy's puppyhood. I made up games for us, you know, we just had so much fun, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. It's just the most precious, one of the most precious times in my life was that time when he was a puppy. And it continues, of course, to be precious because although he's 7, he's just grown better and better. So there's that. But it comes down to the relationship that we create. And that's why we've today not been talking so much about dogs. We've been talking about the human component. Yeah. And I love that we've been able to do that, Holly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been lovely to talk to you. It's like you say, you could talk about it forever, couldn't you? It's such a big topic, so rich. But you're right, it all comes down to relationship. And the best thing about a good relationship is that, just like any friendship, if you've built a good foundation with another being, even when it goes wrong, which it will, something happens, you can repair it so much more quickly and recover it. You can apologize and you can repair it. Whereas if that foundation isn't there initially and something goes wrong, it's much, much harder, much, much harder. So if you just focus on relationship above any other training, then I think you're onto a winner for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now, you have a wonderful website. You have amazing things going on. Tell us your website, please.
So my main website is www.pawsupdogs.com.
And I'll be putting a link to that in the description box. And Holly, thank you so much for your time today. I would love if you could come back at some point to talk about your puppy training that you do. And there's so much on your website that we could spend another 2 hours, I think, just talking about what you do. So it would be lovely if you could come back.
Yeah, I'd love to.
In the meantime, the link will be in the description box for everyone to explore what you do. And well, thank you again. And thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.